The silence in the servants' hall shattered when Mrs. Pembroke's hand struck Elara's cheek. "You will speak when I permit it," the housekeeper hissed, her face mottled with fury. "Not before." Elara did not raise her hand to her burning skin. She did not step backward. She stood perfectly still in the center of the stone-floored kitchen, aware of every eye upon her. The scullery maids frozen at their basins, the footman paused mid-stride, cook's ladle suspended above the copper pot. The entire household staff of Ashworth Manor had assembled to witness her humiliation, summoned by the housekeeper's bell-like congregants to a sermon on sin. 3 months, Mrs. Pembroke continued, her voice carrying the particular venom reserved for those who serve the serving class. 3 months you have been under this roof, and already you presume to question my authority. You, a girl pulled from the workhouse, given bread and a pallet when you deserved neither. Elara's silence was not submission, it was calculation. She had learned, in the 2 years since her father's debts had stripped her of name and future, that words were weapons one could not afford to waste. Mrs. Pembroke wanted contrition, tears, the performance of shame. Elara would give her nothing. "The Marquess himself has complained of the quality of the fires in the blue drawing-room," the housekeeper said, circling Elara like a magistrate before a prisoner. "He has expressed his extreme displeasure at the dust upon the mantelpiece in the library. He has noted, personally noted, the inadequacy of the service in this household." This was a lie. The Marquess of Ashworth had not been seen by any member of the staff below stairs in over 2 years. He took his meals in his private chambers. He received no visitors. He emerged only at night, when the corridors were dark and the servants confined to their quarters. The entire manor existed in service to a ghost, and everyone knew it. But everyone also knew better than to say so. "You will scrub every floor in the West Wing," Mrs. Pembroke declared, "on your hands and knees, without supper, and if I find so much as a single streak upon the marble, you will spend the night in the scullery with the rats for company." Elara inclined her head, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. There was a difference, though only she understood it. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. She had wanted begging. She had wanted to see this girl, who somehow maintained an air of quiet dignity despite her station, brought low at last. Instead, Elara simply turned and walked toward the servants' stairs, her worn shoes whispering against the flagstones. "You think yourself better than you are," Mrs. Pembroke called after her, "but this house has a way of teaching pride its proper place." Elara did not respond. She had learned that silence could be both shield and weapon, and she wielded it with the skill of a soldier who had survived too many battles to count. The West Wing was forbidden territory. Every servant knew this. It was the province of the Marquess himself, a labyrinth of dust-shrouded rooms and locked doors that no one entered without explicit permission that was never given. Even the senior staff avoided it. The footman would not venture past the great landing. The maids made excuses. Only Mrs. Pembroke, who carried the keys to every lock in Ashworth Manor like a jailer carries the keys to cells, ever crossed that threshold, and she did so alone. Until tonight. Elara carried her bucket and brush up 3 flights of stairs, her arms aching with the weight. The manor was silent around her, that particular quality of silence that belongs to old houses where too many secrets have been kept for too long. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her pass, generations of Ashworth men with hard eyes and proud mouths, women with expressions of resignation or defiance, children who had never been allowed to be children. She had studied these faces in her stolen moments, when she should have been sleeping, but instead wandered the permitted corridors like a ghost herself. She had memorized the lineage, the names inscribed on small brass plates. She knew which Marquess had gambled away a fortune, which had died in a duel, which had married for love and been disowned for it. History repeated itself in these halls, tragedy echoing across generations like a bell that never stopped tolling. The west wing began beyond a set of double doors carved with the Ashworth crest, a falcon clutching a broken sword. Someone had covered the handles with cloth, as though even touching them required protection. Elara set down her bucket and pushed. The doors opened soundlessly, well-oiled despite their abandonment. Beyond lay darkness. Elara had been given a single candle grudgingly by Mrs. Pembroke. Its light seemed to shrink in the vastness of the corridor before her, swallowed by shadows that pressed close like living things. The air tasted of dust and something else, neglect perhaps, or despair. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, each step an announcement of intrusion. She began with the first room, a drawing room, where furniture huddled beneath holland covers like sleeping beasts. Her brush moved in steady circles, water darkening the marble as she worked. The task was pointless, she knew. Mrs. Pembroke would find fault regardless. But Elara had learned to find meditation in repetitive labor, to let her mind drift while her hands remained occupied. She thought of her father, as she often did in these quiet hours, of the man he had been before the debts, before the creditors, before the morning she had found him cold in his study with an empty bottle of laudanum on the desk beside him. He had been a gentleman once, a man of learning and gentle humor. He had taught her to read from his own library, to question and think and never accept cruelty as natural law. Kindness is not weakness, Elara, he had told her once when she was very small. It is the hardest form of strength. She had not understood then. She understood now. By midnight she had scrubbed her way through 5 rooms. Her knees were raw, her hands cracked and bleeding from the harsh soap. The candle had burned low, its flame guttering in the draughts that seemed to haunt the west wing. She should return to the servants' quarters, she knew. Mrs. Pembroke would be asleep by now, and what the housekeeper did not witness could not be punished. But something drew her forward. Perhaps it was defiance, perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was simply that she had nowhere else to go, no other place in this vast manor where she belonged. The corridor ended in a final door, this one different from the others. It was smaller, plainer, without ornament or pretension, and beneath it, barely visible in the candlelight, a thin line of yellow light gleamed. Someone was inside. Elara's heart drummed against her ribs. She should retreat. She should flee. Nothing good could come from whatever lay beyond that door. But her hand, moving of its own accord, reached for the handle. It turned beneath her fingers. The room beyond was not what she expected. It was small, almost sparse, furnished only with a desk, a chair, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. A fire burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the walls. And upon the bed, half visible in the uncertain light, lay a man, the Marquess of Ashworth. She knew him instantly, though she had never seen him clearly before. Only glimpses, shadows, the back of a tall figure disappearing around corners. But his face, turned toward her now in the firelight, was unmistakable. It was the face from the portraits in the gallery, that same proud lineage made flesh. High cheekbones, a stern mouth, dark eyes that even in apparent sleep seemed to carry the weight of judgment. But something was wrong. His shirt was open, discarded on the floor beside the bed, and across his left side, extending from beneath his arm to his waist, ran a wound, old, poorly healed, the flesh around it angry and inflamed. Blood had seeped through the bandage, dark against the white linen. His breathing was shallow, labored. Elara stood frozen in the doorway. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to forget what she had seen, to return to the safety of ignorance. The Marquess's privacy was sacrosanct. To intrude upon it was to invite dismissal at best, something far worse at worst. But the wound was infected, even from across the room. She could see the telltale signs, the heat radiating from his skin, the slight tremor in his limbs that spoke of fever. Without treatment, without care, it would kill him. She took a step into the room, then another. The Marquess's eyes opened. They were grey, she saw now, the colour of winter skies before snow, and they fixed upon her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, edged with pain and something else, not anger precisely, something closer to despair. Elara did not answer. She could not. The words lodged in her throat, trapped by years of learning that speech, for people like her, was a privilege to be rationed. "I asked you a question." He attempted to sit up, then fell back with a sharp intake of breath. His hand moved to his side, pressing against the wound. "Answer me." "The scullery maid, my lord," she said at last. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, unused and uncertain. "I was sent to clean the west wing." "At this hour?" His eyes narrowed. "Or were you sent to spy?" "No one knows I am here." "Then you are a fool as well as a trespasser." He turned his face away from her, toward the wall. "Leave, now, and speak of this to no one, or I will have you dismissed without reference and turned out into the road." Elara did not move. "Did you not hear me?" The Marquess's voice rose, cracking slightly. "I said leave. Your wound needs tending, my lord." The silence that followed was absolute. When he spoke again, his voice was very quiet, very dangerous. "You know nothing of my wound. I know that it is infected. I know that without treatment the fever will worsen. I know that you are alone here, and that no one else has seen what I have seen, which means no one else is caring for you." She paused. "I know that you are in pain." "And what business is that of yours?" "None, my lord." "Then why are you still standing there?" Elara considered the question. It was fair, even reasonable. She had no obligation to this man. He was her employer only in the most abstract sense. She had never seen him, never spoken to him, existed entirely beneath his notice until this moment. He had threatened her with dismissal. He clearly wished her gone, but she looked at him, truly looked, and saw something she recognized. It was there, in the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself apart even in his weakness. It was the posture of someone who believed they deserved their suffering, who wore pain like a penance. She had seen it before, in her father's eyes, in the days before the end. "Because," she said slowly, "kindness is not conditional upon deserving it." The Marquess laughed, a bitter sound without humour. "You think to offer me kindness? You, a scullery maid I could have thrown into the street with a word?" "Yes, my lord." "Then you are even more foolish than I thought." But he did not tell her to leave again. Instead, he closed his eyes, his breathing shallow and strained. "Do what you will. It matters very little now." Elara set down her bucket and moved to the fire. She would need hot water, clean cloth, something to draw out the infection. Her mother had been skilled in such things before the fever took her. Elara had learned by watching, by listening, by remembering. She worked in silence, heating water in a basin she found beneath the washstand, tearing strips from what appeared to be an old shirt. The Marquess did not speak, did not acknowledge her presence. But when she returned to the bedside and gently peeled away the soiled bandage, he did not resist. The wound was worse than she had feared. It was old, months, perhaps years, and had been reopened recently, the edges ragged and inflamed. Scar tissue surrounded it, suggesting previous attempts at healing that had failed or been sabotaged. This was not an injury sustained in some accident or misfortune. This was something deliberate, something maintained. "How did this happen?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is not your concern. If I am to treat it properly, you are to clean it and bind it, and then forget you ever saw it," the Marquess said flatly. "Those are your instructions. Can you follow them? Or shall I summon Mrs. Pembroke and have you removed?" Elara bent to her work, the hot cloth moving carefully over the damaged skin. He flinched, but made no sound. His jaw clenched tight. She could feel the heat of fever radiating from him, see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the coolness of the room. "This has been neglected for too long, my lord. The infection has spread. You need a physician." "No physician." The words were sharp, final. "No one else enters this room. No one else knows. Is that understood? But is that understood?" Elara met his eyes. In them, she saw not cruelty, but terror. Whatever secret this wound represented, he guarded it with something approaching desperation. "Yes, my lord." She finished cleaning the wound as gently as she could, then bound it with fresh linen. Her hands, rough from years of labor, moved with surprising delicacy. When she was done, she stepped back and surveyed her work. It was not perfect, she was no trained nurse, but it was better than what had been there before. "You should rest, my lord. The fever will break by morning if you presume a great deal," the Marquess interrupted. But his voice had lost some of its edge, softened by exhaustion. "What is your name?" "Elara, my lord." "Elara." He repeated it as though testing the weight of it. "You will return tomorrow night, same hour. Tell no one. Mrs. Pembroke will not question you if you are clever about it, and you seem clever enough despite your foolishness." He turned his face away once more. "Now go. I am untired." Elara gathered her things, the bucket, the soiled bandages, the evidence of her transgression. At the door she paused and looked back. The Marquess lay very still, his eyes closed, one hand resting lightly over the fresh bandage. In the firelight, he looked younger than she had thought and infinitely weary. "Good night, my lord," she said softly. He did not answer. The next morning brought no reprieve. Mrs. Pembroke summoned Elara before dawn, her face set in its customary expression of disapproval. "The West Wing floors were barely adequate," she announced, though she could not possibly have inspected them yet. "You will repeat the task tonight, every room, every surface, and this time I expect perfection." Elara lowered her eyes to hide her relief. "Yes, Mrs. Pembroke. And you will take no supper again. Idleness and incompetence will not be rewarded in this household." "Yes, Mrs. Pembroke." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, searching perhaps for some sign of defiance or complaint. Finding none, she waved a dismissive hand. "Get to the scullery. The breakfast dishes won't wash themselves." The day passed in the usual rhythm of labor, washing, scrubbing, polishing, hauling. Elara moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She thought of the Marquess's wound, of the fever in his skin, of the desperate secrecy that surrounded his suffering. She thought of the way he had looked at her, not with the casual dismissal she had expected from a man of his station, but with something approaching fear. What had happened to him? What error, unpardonable, unforgivable, could drive a man to maintain such a wound, to refuse treatment, to hide himself away like a criminal? "Daydreaming again, are we?" Cook's voice startled her back to the present. The older woman stood with her hands on her ample hips, her expression more amused than angry. "I've called your name 3 times, girl. Where's your head? Forgive me, Mrs. Fletcher, I was—" "Never mind where you were. Take this up to the housekeeper's office." She thrust a tea tray into Elara's hands. "And don't dawdle. She's in one of her moods." Elara carried the tray through the servants' corridors, navigating the narrow passages with practiced ease. She had just reached the housekeeper's door when voices from within made her pause. "Cannot continue indefinitely," a man was saying. The voice was unfamiliar, refined, carrying the accent of London society. "The estate requires management. Decisions must be made. He cannot simply hide himself away and expect the world to accommodate his condition." "Mr. Hartwell." Mrs. Pembroke's voice, unctuous and deferential in a way it never was with the servants. "You must understand, his lordship has made his wishes quite clear. He is not to be disturbed. His wishes are immaterial, If they threaten the stability of the estate, the man, Mr. Hartwell, interrupted. I am the estate manager, Mrs. Pembroke. I have a responsibility to the tenants, to the investments, to the future of Ashworth itself. A responsibility that supersedes one man's desire for isolation. If you would only be patient. It has been 2 years. 2 years of silence, of refused meetings, of correspondence answered by a secretary I have never met. The other families are beginning to talk. There are questions about his lordship's health, his sanity, his very fitness to hold the title. That is slander, Mr. Hartwell, vicious, unfounded slander. Perhaps, but slander takes root when the truth is hidden too carefully. A pause. I will see him, Mrs. Pembroke. This week. I will not be put off again. Elara did not wait to hear more. She set the tray quietly on the floor and retreated before she could be discovered. Her mind raced. An estate manager demanding access, questions about fitness to hold the title. These were not idle threats. The Marquess's isolation had protected him thus far, but that protection was failing. And somehow, impossibly, she had become entangled in whatever secret he was so desperate to keep. That night, she returned to the West Wing with fresh bandages hidden beneath her apron. The corridor was dark as before, the silence oppressive. But when she reached the Marquess's chamber, the door stood slightly ajar. He was waiting for her. He sat in the chair by the fire, fully dressed this time, though his movements, as he gestured for her to enter, suggested the wound still pained him. His face was pale, drawn, but the fever seemed to have broken. "You came," he said, and there was something in his voice. Not gratitude, precisely, but perhaps surprise. "You commanded it, my lord." "I did, but I did not expect obedience." He watched her set down her supplies, his grey eyes unreadable. "You could have reported what you saw, gone to Mrs. Pembroke, to the servants' hall, sold the story to one of the scandal sheets for more money than you'll see in a year of scrubbing floors." "I could have," Elara agreed, "but I did not." "Why?" She considered the question as she prepared the hot water, the clean cloth. Why indeed? She owed this man nothing. He represented everything she had lost. Privilege, security, the casual certainty of belonging. He could destroy her with a word, and likely would when her usefulness ended. "Because," she said at last, "everyone deserves the dignity of their secrets, my lord, until they choose to share them." The Marquess was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You are an unusual scullery maid, Elara. I am a scullery maid who was once something else, as you are a Marquess who is now this." She gestured vaguely at the room, the isolation, the hidden wound. "And what do you imagine this to be?" "I do not presume to imagine, my lord. I only observe." "And what do your observations tell you?" Elara moved to his side, began carefully unwrapping the bandage. The wound looked better, the inflammation slightly reduced, though it was still far from healed. "That you are in pain," she said quietly. "That you have been in pain for a very long time, that you believe you deserve it." She paused, her hands gentle on the damaged skin. "And that you are very, very alone." The Marquess drew in a sharp breath, though whether from the physical pain or her words she could not say. "You overstep." "Yes, my lord. You should be more careful. I am not a man who tolerates impertinence." "No, my lord, you are a man who tolerates nothing at all, least of all yourself." The silence that followed was profound. Elara continued her work, cleaning the wound with careful strokes, watching for signs of further infection. The Marquess sat rigid, his hands gripping the arms of the chair until his knuckles showed white. "It was my fault," he said suddenly, the words erupting as though against his will. "All of it. My fault." Elara did not respond, did not look up from her work. She had learned that confessions, like frightened birds, required stillness to approach. There was an accident, 2 years ago. My curricle, on the road from London. The axle broke, the horses bolted. His voice was flat, reciting facts as one might recite a lesson. My younger brother was with me, Thomas. He was thrown from the vehicle, broke his neck, died instantly. Elara's hands stilled. She looked up at him now, saw the anguish carved into every line of his face. The axle had been damaged. I had been warned about it the week before, told to have it repaired. But I was too busy, too preoccupied with matters of business to attend to something so trivial. So I ignored the warning, and Thomas paid the price for my negligence. I am sorry, my lord. Sorry. The word was bitter. Sorry does not resurrect the dead. Sorry does not return a son to his grieving mother, a brother to his sisters, an heir to his name. Sorry is the refuge of the powerless, and I was anything but powerless. I had every resource, every advantage. I simply chose not to use them. I chose my own convenience over my brother's life. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window despite the obvious pain it cost him, his hand pressed against his side over the hidden wound. I was driving, he continued, when the axle broke, the vehicle overturned. A piece of the wreckage caught me here. He gestured to his ribs, tore open the skin. The physician stitched it, bound it, told me it would heal in a matter of weeks. But you did not let it heal. No. The word was barely a whisper. I tore out the stitches as soon as I was able, let it become infected, reopened it when it tried to close, because I deserved it, because pain is the only honest response to what I had done. Elara absorbed this revelation, turning it over in her mind. She thought of her father, of the guilt that had driven him to laudanum and despair. She thought of all the ways people punished themselves for crimes both real and imagined. And so you hide, she said. You isolate yourself, refuse visitors, let the world believe you mad or infirm. You transform your estate into a prison and yourself into your own jailer. It is what I deserve. Is it what your brother would have wanted? The Marquess turned on her, his eyes blazing. You did not know, Thomas. You have no right. I have every right to speak the truth, my lord, even if you do not wish to hear it. She stood, meeting his gaze without flinching. Your brother is dead. That is a tragedy, but you are alive, and you are choosing to waste that life in service to guilt. That is not penance, that is pride. Pride? The word was strangled. You dare accuse me of pride? Yes, the pride of believing that your suffering is somehow sufficient payment for his death. The pride of assuming that your pain matters more than your duty to those who depend upon you. The pride of martyrdom, which is perhaps the worst pride of all. For a moment she thought he would strike her. His hand rose, trembling with fury or anguish or both. But instead he simply stood there, breathing hard, his entire body shaking. Get out, he said at last. Get out and do not return. Elara did not move. The wound needs to be dressed, my lord. I said get out. No. The single syllable hung in the air between them. The Marquess stared at her, disbelief written across his features. No one, she imagined, had dared refuse him in his entire life. I'm your employer, he said slowly, as though explaining something to a child. You are my servant. When I give an order, you obey. When you give a reasonable order, my lord, I will obey gladly, but I will not obey an order that causes you harm. She gestured to the wound. Sit down. Let me finish. You are dismissed, effective immediately. You will leave this house first thing in the morning. Very well, my lord. I will leave in the morning, but first I will finish dressing your wound, because unlike you, I do not believe that anyone, not even you, deserves to suffer needlessly. They stood locked in a battle of wills. neither willing to yield, and then slowly the Marquess sank back into his chair. Not in surrender, perhaps, but in exhaustion. "You are the most stubborn, infuriating woman I have ever encountered," he said. "Yes, my lord, and you will not be dismissed by morning. I cannot afford to have you spreading tales. I have told no tales thus far. What makes you think I would begin now?" He had no answer for that. Elara completed her work in silence, rebandaging the wound with practiced efficiency. When she was done, she gathered her supplies and moved toward the door. "Elara." She paused, turned. The Marquess remained in his chair, his face half in shadow. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Truly, what does it matter to you whether I suffer or heal?" She considered the question, searching for an answer that was both true and comprehensible. "My father took his own life," she said at last, "because he believed that his mistakes had made him unworthy of living, because he could not forgive himself for failing those he loved. I could not save him, but perhaps—" She trailed off, uncertain. "Perhaps you can save me." "No, my lord, I cannot save you, but perhaps I can remind you that you are worth saving. The rest must be your choice." She left before he could respond, slipping out into the darkened corridor like a ghost returning to its proper realm. The following days established a pattern. By day, Elara performed her duties under Mrs. Pembroke's watchful eye, scrubbing and polishing and maintaining the careful invisibility required of her station. By night, she climbed the stairs to the west wing and tended the Marquess's wound, while he sat in stubborn silence or paced the room like a caged animal. They spoke little at first. He seemed to regret his earlier confession, retreating behind walls of aristocratic distance. She respected this, focusing on the practical matter of healing rather than forcing conversation. But gradually, in the quiet hours past midnight, the silence between them shifted from hostile to companionable. She learned in fragments about his life before the accident, about Thomas, who had been everything the Marquess was not, charming, gregarious, beloved by all who knew him, about the weight of expectations that had fallen on the Marquess as the eldest son, the heir, the one who must be serious and dutiful while his younger brother was permitted the luxury of joy. "He used to make me laugh," the Marquess said one night, his voice distant with memory. "Even when I was drowning in ledgers and correspondence, Thomas could walk into a room and somehow make everything seem less oppressive. He had a gift for it, for lightness, for reminding people that life was meant to be lived, not merely endured. You loved him very much." "I did. I do." He paused. "Which is why I cannot forgive myself for stealing his future." Elara said nothing, only continued her careful ministrations. The wound was healing at last, the infection receding under her nightly care. But she knew that physical healing was only part of the battle. She learned too about the estate, about the tenants who depended on the Marquess's decisions, the investments that required oversight, the responsibilities he had abandoned in his retreat from the world. Mr. Hartwell's complaints, she discovered, were not mere bureaucratic frustration. The estate was suffering from neglect, decisions deferred, opportunities lost. "You have a duty, my lord," she said one evening, after he had mentioned another letter from the estate manager left unanswered, "not just to the dead, but to the living. Do not presume to lecture me on duty. Someone must. You have locked yourself away, but the world continues outside these walls. People depend on you, your tenants, your servants, your family, your mother, your sisters. Do they not deserve your attention? They are better off without me. That is not for you to decide." He turned on her, anger flashing in his eyes. "You forget yourself." "I forget nothing, my lord. I simply refuse to pretend that your self-imposed exile is noble when it is merely cowardice dressed in the costume of grief." The slap never came. though she half expected it. Instead, the Marquis simply stood there, his chest heaving, his hands clenched at his sides. "You know nothing of what I feel," he said at last. "I know guilt, my lord. I know the weight of it, the way it colours everything, until the world becomes nothing but a catalogue of failures and regrets. I know the temptation to simply stop, to give up, to accept suffering as inevitable and deserved." She met his eyes. "I also know that guilt is not the same as justice, and suffering is not the same as atonement." "Then what is? Living, my lord, living well and using what you have learned from your mistakes to do better, to be better, to honour those you have lost by becoming worthy of their memory." He laughed, that same bitter sound she had heard on their first meeting. "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple at all. It is the hardest thing in the world, but it is necessary if you wish to be something more than a ghost haunting your own life." The Marquess turned away, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was very quiet. "I do not know if I can." "You can, my lord. The question is whether you will." 3 weeks passed. The wound healed, slowly but steadily, until it was little more than a thin red line against his skin. Still visible, still there, but no longer infected, no longer threatening. Elara continued her visits, though the medical justification had faded. She told herself it was to ensure the healing continued, to watch for signs of relapse. But truthfully, she continued because she had grown to value these quiet hours, because in the Marquis's isolated chamber, away from the hierarchies and judgments of the household below, she could be something more than invisible. She could speak, question, challenge. She could exist as herself, not merely as the function she served. And the Marquis, for his part, seemed to value her presence as well. He began to ask her questions about her life before the workhouse, about her father, about the education she had received and the world she had lost. He listened when she spoke of books she had read, ideas she had encountered, thoughts she had never been permitted to voice aloud in the servants' hall. "You should not be scrubbing floors," he said one night, apropos of nothing. Elara looked up from her sewing. She had taken to bringing some small task to occupy her hands during their conversations. "Where should I be, my lord?" "I do not know, but surely not wasting your intelligence on menial labour. Intelligence is a luxury of the privileged, my lord. For the rest of us, it is merely another tool to survive." "That is a bleak philosophy. It is a realistic one." He fell silent, considering this. Then, "If you could choose any life, any future, what would it be?" Elara set down her sewing. No one had asked her such a question in years, perhaps ever. "I suppose I would like to be useful, to do work that matters, that helps people, to read again, to learn, to live with dignity." She paused. "And perhaps to not be afraid, constantly, of the next disaster, to have some measure of security. Not love, not marriage, children, the domestic happiness women are supposed to desire. I do not discount those things, my lord, but they seem distant, improbable. Whereas usefulness, learning, dignity, these are things I might actually achieve given the opportunity." "You are a strange woman, Elara." "So you have said, my lord. I mean it as a compliment." "I know." The silence that followed was comfortable, almost companionable. The Marquis returned to the letter he had been reading, and Elara returned to her sewing. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to soften the edges of the world. "Mr. Hartwell is coming tomorrow," the Marquis said abruptly. "He has insisted on a meeting. Mrs. Pembroke could not put him off any longer." Elara's hand stilled. "Will you see him?" "I do not know. The thought of facing anyone from before, it fills me with a dread I cannot quite name." The dread of judgment? No, the dread of pity, of seeing in their eyes what I have become. He set down the letter. Or perhaps the dread of being told that I must return to the world, must take up responsibilities I am no longer fit to bear. You are fitter than you believe, my lord. How can you possibly know that? Because I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen you grapple with your guilt, your grief, your fear. I have seen you begin, however reluctantly, to tend to yourself, to accept care, to consider a future beyond this room. That is not the behavior of a man who is unfit. That is the behavior of a man who is healing. The Marquess rose and paced to the window, his movements now almost fluid, the pain that had characterized his every gesture largely gone. And if I fail, if I emerge from this isolation only to prove everyone's worst assumptions correct, then you will have failed while trying, which is infinitely preferable to failing while hiding. He turned to look at her, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight. You have a remarkable talent for making difficult truths sound reasonable. It is a talent born of necessity, my lord. Yes, I suppose it is. He moved back to his chair, but did not sit. Instead, he stood there, one hand resting on its back, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. If I meet with Hartwell tomorrow, will you attend? Elara blinked, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon, my lord. I know it is an unusual request, inappropriate even, but I find that I would value your presence, your steadiness. You have become something of an anchor these past weeks, and I fear that without it I may yet sink. My lord, I am a scullery maid. I cannot possibly attend a meeting between you and your estate manager. It would be— I am the Marquess of Ashworth, he interrupted, a hint of his old authority returning to his voice. I can have whomever I wish present at my meetings. If I choose to have a scullery maid in attendance, then that is precisely what will happen. Mrs. Pembroke will be apoplectic. Mrs. Pembroke serves at my pleasure, not the reverse. She will accept my decisions or seek employment elsewhere. Elara studied him, searching for the right words to explain why this was impossible, why it would only cause complications, why she should remain in her proper place. But looking at him, at the vulnerability poorly masked by aristocratic command, at the fear he was working so hard to suppress, she found she could not refuse. Very well, my lord, if you wish it. Relief flooded his features, quickly suppressed. Thank you. But you must understand, I cannot offer anything of value to such a meeting. I know nothing of estate management or finance, or you offer perspective, Elara, clarity, truth, even when it is unwelcome. That is worth more than any technical expertise. She did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and returned to her sewing, while the Marquess settled once more into his chair and the rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass. Neither of them acknowledged the shift that had occurred, the way the distance between master and servant, between Marquess and scullery maid, had quietly eroded over these past weeks until something new stood in its place. Something neither could quite name, but both could feel, something that felt dangerously like trust. Mr. Hartwell arrived at precisely 11 o'clock. Elara watched from the servants' hall as his carriage pulled up the drive, a sleek black vehicle that spoke of urban sophistication. The man who emerged was middle-aged, impeccably dressed, with the brisk efficiency of one who measured time in guineas and minutes. Mrs. Pembroke met him at the door, all false deference and apology. Mr. Hartwell, we were not expecting you until— I sent word 3 days ago, Mrs. Pembroke. If it did not reach you, that is a matter to be addressed separately. His voice carried the clipped tones of a man accustomed to being obeyed. I am here to see Lord Ashworth. Please inform him of my arrival. The housekeeper's face tightened. His lordship is— indisposed. If you would care to wait in the drawing room, I will see if Mrs. Pembroke. The Marquess's voice, strong and clear, echoed down the grand staircase. Please show Mr. Hartwell to my study. I will join him presently. Every servant in the hall froze. The Marquess had not used the study in 2 years, had not descended the main stairs in all that time, and yet there he stood, dressed in the formal clothing of his rank, his bearing erect, despite what Elara knew must be lingering discomfort from the healing wound. He looked, she thought with a catch in her chest, like a marquess. Mrs. Pembroke recovered first, though shock still painted her features. "My lord, Yes, of course. This way, Mr. Hartwell." The estate manager followed her down the corridor, but not before casting a long, appraising look at the Marquess. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy some concern, for he nodded once, sharply, before disappearing from view. The Marquess descended the stairs with careful dignity. When he reached the bottom, he paused and looked directly at Elara, who stood with the other servants, trying desperately to appear as though she belonged there. "Miss Elara," he said, his tone formal, impersonal, "you will attend me in the study. Bring tea." The servants' hall erupted in whispered shock the moment he was gone. Mrs. Pembroke, returning from escorting Mr. Hartwell, turned on Elara with fury in her eyes. "What is the meaning of this? How does his lordship even know your name?" Elara kept her expression neutral. "I could not say, Mrs. Pembroke. You will speak when spoken to, girl. I will not have—" "Mrs. Pembroke." The Marquess had returned, his voice cutting through the housekeeper's tirade like a blade. "Did I not ask for tea? Why is it not being prepared?" "My lord, this girl is entirely unsuitable to serve in the formal rooms. She is a scullery maid, not a—" "I am aware of her position. I am also aware that I require tea in my study, and I require it now. Are you suggesting that you are unable to fulfill this simple request?" The housekeeper's face mottled with suppressed rage. "No, my lord, of course not. The tea will be prepared immediately. See that it is, and see that Miss Elara brings it personally. I will not repeat myself." He left without waiting for acknowledgement, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Mrs. Pembroke turned to Elara, her voice a hiss of venom. "I do not know what game you are playing, but it will end badly for you. Mark my words." Elara said nothing. She simply moved to the kitchen and prepared the tea tray, her hands steady despite the chaos of her thoughts. What was the Marquess doing? Why draw such attention to her? It would only make her position in the household more precarious, more dangerous. But she had promised to attend him, and whatever else she was, Elara kept her promises. The study was a revelation. It was a large room, panelled in dark wood, with floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with books. A massive desk dominated the centre, its surface buried under stacks of correspondence, ledgers and documents. Light streamed through tall windows, illuminating floating dust motes that danced in the air. Mr. Hartwell stood by the window examining a painting. He turned when Elara entered, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of her. "Ah, the tea. Excellent." The Marquess gestured to a side table. "Set it there, please." Elara did as instructed, acutely aware of the estate manager's scrutiny. She could feel his assessment, his confusion at her presence in this formal setting. "That will be all," the Marquess said. Then, as she turned to leave, "Actually, no. Miss Elara, please remain. I may have need of your assistance." "My lord?" Mr. Hartwell's tone was carefully neutral. "I had understood this to be a private meeting regarding estate business." "It is. However, Miss Elara has been providing me with clerical assistance these past weeks. Her presence may prove useful." The lie was delivered smoothly, confidently. Mr. Hartwell's expression suggested skepticism, but he was too well-bred to argue with a Marquess in his own home. "Very well, my lord. Shall we begin?" The meeting that followed was both tedious and fascinating. Mr. Hartwell laid out the state of the estate with ruthless efficiency, rents collected, repairs needed, tenants struggling, investments proposed. The Marquess listened, asked questions, made decisions with a swiftness that suggested his mind had not been idle during his isolation. And throughout it all, Elara stood by the window, ostensibly available if needed, but in reality simply observing. She watched the way the Marquess's hand occasionally moved to his side, a reflexive gesture when the discussion grew particularly stressful. She saw how he drew strength from her presence, glancing her way when Mr. Hartwell pressed particularly hard on some point of contention. She was, she realized, serving as his anchor, just as he had asked. "I must be frank, my lord, Mr. Hartwell said after nearly an hour of discussion. Your return to active management is most welcome, but it raises certain questions. The rumors about your health, about the reasons for your seclusion, they have done damage. There are those who question whether you are truly fit to manage an estate of this size and complexity." The Marquess stiffened. "And what is your assessment, Mr. Hartwell?" "My assessment is that you seem perfectly capable, my lord, but I am not the one who needs convincing. The other families, your peers, your tenants, they will need to see evidence of your commitment, your engagement with the world you have been absent from. And how do you suggest I provide such evidence? By accepting invitations, by attending social events, by making yourself visible once more in society." Mr. Hartwell paused. "There is an assembly planned for next month. Many of the local families will be in attendance. Your presence would go far toward dispelling the more malicious rumors." Elara saw the colour drain from the Marquess's face. The thought of entering society, of facing the scrutiny and pity of his peers, clearly terrified him. "I will consider it," he said at last. "With respect, my lord, consideration is insufficient. The estate needs active management, yes, but it also needs a Marquess who can navigate the social and political landscape. If you cannot do that—" "I said I will consider it, Mr. Hartwell. That is my final answer on the subject." The estate manager inclined his head, accepting the rebuke. But Elara could see the doubt in his eyes, the concern that the Marquess's return was merely temporary, that he would retreat once more into isolation at the first real test. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with Mr. Hartwell gathering his papers and promising to return in a fortnight to continue their discussions. The Marquess escorted him to the door with impeccable courtesy, every inch the aristocrat, but Elara could see the strain in the set of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched against some inner pain. When they were alone again, he sagged against his desk. "That was exhausting," he said, "but successful, my lord. You handled yourself admirably." "Did I? Hartwell thinks me a coward for refusing the assembly." "He thinks you cautious. There is a difference." The Marquess looked at her, really looked, his grey eyes searching her face for something. "Do you think I should go to this assembly?" Elara chose her words carefully. "I think, my lord, that you must decide what you are willing to risk for the sake of your estate and your future. Hiding has kept you safe but has solved nothing. Emerging will be difficult, painful even. But it may also be necessary. And if I fail, if I attend this assembly and prove myself unequal to the task, then you will know you tried, and you will have the opportunity to try again." He smiled, faint and sad. "You make it sound so simple." "It is never simple, my lord, but sometimes it is necessary." He pushed away from the desk and moved to the window, staring out at the gardens below. "I could not have done this without you, you know. Today, these past weeks, you have been—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. Elara waited, her heart beating too fast in her chest. "A good nurse," he said finally. "An excellent assistant." The words felt inadequate, incomplete. But Elara accepted them with a nod. "Thank you, my lord." "No, Elara, thank you." The silence that followed was charged with something neither could name. The distance between them seemed both vast and negligible, an unbridgeable chasm and a single step all at once. "You should return to your duties," the Marquis said at last, "before Mrs. Pembroke sends a search party." "Yes, my lord." But neither of them moved. They stood there, Marquess and Scullery Maid, separated by every rule of society and station, connected by something far more fundamental. It was Elara who broke first, turning toward the door. "Good day, my lord." "Good day, Elara." She paused at the threshold, looking back. "For what it is worth, my lord, I believe you are stronger than you think, and I believe your brother would be proud of the man you are becoming." Before he could respond, she slipped out into the corridor, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the echo of her words.